Hey, tonight we travel back to a small, weathered village in 14th century Europe, a time when life was woven tightly with faith, fear, and the relentless struggle for survival. But before you settle in, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, only if this story truly calls to you. Share in the comments where you're joining from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to connect with voices from all corners of the world. Now, dim your lights. Maybe let a soft breeze hum nearby, and let's drift gently into this world together. Imagine waking up in a tiny clay and straw hut. The morning light sneaks in through the cracks, casting pale patterns on the rough wooden floor. The faint aroma of yesterday's vegetable stew lingers near the cold hearth. The air feels thick with damp earth and the faint smoke of last night's embers. Outside, a rooster crows lazily, while distant dogs bark and a nearby stream whispers its ceaseless song. This is your world, a fragile balance between the comforts of hearth and the uncertainties beyond. Life here is hard. Food is scarce, sickness is common, and war stories often ripple through the cold winds that sweep the fields. It's no wonder that when misfortune strikes, eyes quickly turn to the unknown, and to those among you who seem different, or who speak words that unsettle the village's fragile peace. This is where the story of witches begins, not with dark sorcery, but with human fear and the desperate search for meaning. You'll come to understand how the threads of superstition, tradition, and ignorance wove together, slowly crafting the terrifying image of the witch. How did someone become the embodiment of evil in the minds of their neighbors? Why did your fellow villagers start to believe that an ordinary person might secretly trade their soul to the devil himself? As the day unfolds, you'll hear the distant toll of church bells and the solemn murmur of Latin prayers echoing through stone walls. Nearby, the blacksmith's hammer falls rhythmically on iron, while the miller's wheel creaks under the weight of the grain. All around, life struggles to persist amid shadows of doubt and suspicion. But here's the question that lingers, turning the night restless. Why would a simple person, rooted in this very soil and sweat, come to believe that someone they know could strike a dark bargain with forces unseen? What made fear so powerful that it bent the truth itself? Let's walk into this world together, step by cautious step, and unravel the beginnings of a fear that shaped centuries. The question still lingers from before. How could simple, hard-working villagers genuinely come to believe that someone living among them had made a pact with dark, unseen forces? To truly understand this, you must find yourself stepping quietly into a different place now, inside the stone walls of a medieval church, somewhere deep within 14th century Europe. Imagine yourself there, gently allowing your senses to absorb every detail. The air inside feels cool, almost cold against your skin, even though outside the morning sun has already risen warmly over green pastures. It carries a faint scent of melting beeswax, mixed delicately with the lingering aroma of incense from the previous night's vespers. Candles burn softly, their flickering flames casting long, trembling shadows onto rough stone walls. Before you stands the priest, his voice echoing gently yet firmly beneath the high arched ceiling. His robes rustle softly as he gestures passionately toward the congregation, describing vividly how Satan and his minions wander unseen amongst mankind, spreading temptation, corruption, and ruin. You hear murmurs from the crowd around you, a mix of quiet agreement and solemn fear. People hold their breath, leaning forward slightly, hanging on each carefully chosen word from the pulpit. For them, evil isn't abstract, it's tangible, as real as the dirt beneath their feet or the wooden pew you're sitting on. This isn't just a weekly sermon. It's a stark reminder of the constant battle between good and evil, heaven and hell, salvation and damnation. Feel the rough wood beneath your hands, worn smooth by generations of villagers who've sat precisely where you sit now, wrestling quietly with these same troubling thoughts. Notice the dim glow of sunlight filtering through stained glass windows, casting muted reds, blues and greens upon your neighbours' faces, painting their features in colours both soothing and unsettling. It's in moments like this, amid the hushed tones and earnest faces, that you begin to realise how easily faith and fear became intertwined in the minds of everyday medieval people. Now imagine stepping out of this solemn church, the heavy oak door closing softly behind you. The sun greets you warmly again, its rays gentle yet reassuring. Nearby, the market buzzes softly with activity. Vendors shouting prices of fresh apples and cheeses, children playing carefree games by the village well. But beneath this picturesque surface runs an undercurrent of cautious whispers. Stories shared quietly around evening fires about strange happenings in neighbouring towns, sudden misfortunes, livestock falling mysteriously ill, or crops withering without explanation. These local whispers and fears weren't born overnight. They were carefully nourished by decades, even centuries, of teachings and official pronouncements. One key catalyst for these beliefs came directly from the Church itself, particularly in the form of papal bulls, official decrees issued by the Pope that painted witchcraft as not merely superstition, but heresy punishable by severe means. In 1326, Pope John XXII issued a papal bull called Super Specula, which officially linked witchcraft with heresy, setting a dangerous precedent. Such pronouncements didn't just suggest that witches might exist. They declared unequivocally that anyone dabbling in sorcery was actively aiding Satan himself. Picture now how these formal declarations filtered down through bishops, priests, and eventually village churches just like yours, transforming vague fears into specific church-endorsed threats. The local clergy, interpreting these proclamations, made evil seem omnipresent, lurking behind every sickness, every crop failure, every sudden storm. Their sermons didn't just shape beliefs. They molded entire communities around a shared terror that evil forces had a tangible presence, right there, next door, hiding behind familiar faces and ordinary activities. As you walk slowly through the busy marketplace, overhear fragments of quiet conversations. A woman whispers anxiously to her neighbor about strange dreams she's had, visions filled with unsettling imagery. Nearby, a group of elderly men nod knowingly, exchanging stories of odd events they've witnessed or heard of. Small rumors quickly snowball into undeniable truths in such an atmosphere. The lines between imagination and reality blur dangerously, and the slightest eccentricity, an unusual herb garden, a misunderstood healing practice, or even a lone elderly woman keeping to herself, can quickly become suspect. This blending of ancient local beliefs with Christian teachings further strengthened the fear of witches. Before Christianity firmly rooted itself, European peasants had lived by different spiritual rules. Pagan traditions honored nature and spirits openly. As Christianity spread, these old traditions weren't entirely erased. Instead, they were reshaped, recast as suspicious rituals linked to dark powers. The wise woman who brewed herbal remedies suddenly became a shadowy figure, perhaps not a healer at all, but someone secretly communing with evil forces. Feel the tension subtly rise as you pass through the village square, noticing wary glances, tight expressions, hushed tones. Imagine how every unfortunate event, from a drought that ruins crops to an epidemic sweeping through livestock, only strengthened these suspicions. Misfortune needed an explanation, and witches provided an unsettlingly convenient answer. Yet even amid this unsettling tension, villagers found ways to maintain moments of comfort and joy. Hear now the warm, rhythmic laughter from the tavern at day's end, the soothing songs sung gently around family hearths, stories of bravery, kindness, and small miracles shared quietly at bedtime. Life wasn't solely fear and suspicion. It was also resilience, humor, and simple pleasures. Warm bread freshly baked, the satisfying clink of metal as the blacksmith shaped horseshoes, or the comforting lull of evening prayers shared by families before drifting into sleep. But still, beneath even these peaceful moments lingered unease, a subtle awareness that the line between neighbor and enemy, truth and superstition, safety and danger was perilously thin. As you settle into the soft comfort of your straw-filled mattress tonight, let one question gently pull you deeper into reflection. How exactly did daily life change for ordinary villagers once the church transformed the abstract fear of witchcraft into a tangible weapon of control, suspicion, and persecution? You step back into the village, this time from a different path. The foot-worn track that curls around the mill and leads to the heart of daily life, the market. The morning sun has climbed higher now, casting a soft golden sheen across the thatched rooftops and warming the mist still lingering above the thatch. You feel its gentle heat on your skin, but it's the scents that greet you first. Warm rye bread just pulled from clay ovens, the smoky edge of salted fish hanging above a stall, and a lingering note of crushed rosemary wafting from a wooden bowl near your hand. The square hums with life. Women in layered wool skirts adjust headscarves and call out prices, their voices mixing with the chatter of barter and the laughter of children splashing barefoot near the central well. A flock of hens squawks indignantly as a boy chases them away from a basket of stolen oats. You pass a cloth seller who folds a bolt of undyed linen with fingers calloused from years of work, her nails stained faintly green from nettle dye. And then you notice her. Margaret, bent slightly from age, a linen shawl drawn tight across her shoulders despite the mild air. Her stall stands apart, not for lack of trade, but out of unspoken design. People glance her way, but hesitate to meet her gaze. On the rough plank before her lie bunches of dried herbs, knotted bundles of thyme, yarrow, mugwort, and St. John's wort, each bundle bound with red thread, each labelled in slanted script that few can read. She has no shouting chant like the others. She waits, quiet, still, watching. You step closer. The air around her smells different, sharp and green like wild mint and smoke-dried sage. She picks up a bundle without a word and places it in your hand. Her eyes, pale and filmy with age, study you not with suspicion but recognition, as if she's seen thousands of faces and knows which ones will ask for willow bark for pain and which will ask for something darker. This woman, once a midwife and healer, now walks a narrow path. Her knowledge of roots and fevers, once vital in the days before plague doctors and apothecaries, is now a cause for murmurs. Why does she know what she knows? How does she speak of cures without formal blessing? Her hut at the village edge. Why is there always smoke from it at night? You follow her path back in memory. The children she's helped deliver, the fevers she's broken with warm broths and bitter teas, the mothers she's comforted with hands that knew when to press and when to let go. Yet all of it, all those years of service, stand like straw in the wind when someone's cow dies after eating wild mushrooms, or when a child fails to wake after a night of coughing. You see it happen now. A mother, red-eyed and tight-lipped, pulls her little girl closer as Margaret passes. The woman does not meet the old healer's gaze. Another villager, leaning against a fence post, mutters something low. A gesture is made. 2 fingers trace quickly near the heart. Not a greeting, a ward, and so it begins. The slow erosion of trust. Not with flames or shackles, but with glances, whispers, the quiet tightening of space between one soul and another. Imagine being Margaret, living among people who once brought her eggs in gratitude, now offering only silence or suspicion. Her days remain the same, rising early, tending the little herb garden, boiling water for poultices, muttering half-remembered Latin beneath her breath. Not incantations, but fragments of forgotten prayers. Now picture her collecting rainwater in clay pots behind her home, setting out rosemary to dry on rags, writing notes in a faded ledger with trembling fingers. All these acts so simple, yet one unlucky moment, a passing illness, a failed birth, a cow that drops suddenly in the field, and suspicion blooms like mold in damp straw. You're beginning to see the pattern. Women like Margaret became lightning rods for fear, especially if they were old, alone, or knew too much, if they lived without a man, if they owned land, if they spoke too freely or too little. In a world where survival often depended on community, standing even slightly outside it could be fatal. And it wasn't only the Margarets. Younger women too, midwives, widows, herb sellers and quiet wives with knowledge passed down through generations, began to feel the heat of stares too long held. The suspicion often followed patterns as predictable as the seasons. A poor harvest, a sudden death, a rumour whispered between ale mugs, and always, always it found fertile soil in the lives of women who didn't quite fit. Consider now the undercurrent that pulses beneath this village's routine. Not malice, not even hatred, just fear. A fear fed by ignorance, stoked by grief, and shaped by the long arm of church teachings that painted Eve as the gate through which sin entered the world. Wasn't it easier, safer even, to blame a neighbour than to accept the randomness of suffering? You walk away from the market as the sun reaches its zenith, the chatter behind you slowly fading. A soft breeze stirs your cloak as you pass fields turning golden in the light. The quiet stretches around you. You glance back once. Margaret is still there, still selling her herbs, still not quite part of the village she's always served. And the thought tightens in your chest like a string wound around the heart. Why was it that women, so often the keepers of care and knowledge, became the first to be accused when the world turned cold? You find yourself standing at the edge of a field where wheat once grew tall and golden, now scorched to brittle husks. The sun hangs low and heavy, its light the colour of rusted brass. Beneath your feet, the earth is cracked and dry, its veins emptied of life. As you turn, you see them gathering, figures moving slowly from thatched homes, drawn to the same clearing like moths to a dwindling flame. Farmers, wives, millers, weavers, tired faces, cautious voices. A gathering not for celebration, but reckoning. You sit in the circle of packed soil among them, where a flat stone serves as a kind of speaking seat. The silence here is dense, not peaceful. It pulses with something unspoken. You hear the rustle of dry grass, the low creak of a wagon wheel, the occasional cough, and above all, a stillness that makes you press your cloak tighter. The grain stores are low. The cattle grow sick. The midwife's apprentice died in her sleep last week. No one knows why. At first, no one speaks. Then someone does. A man, hands calloused from ploughing, voice tight. He mentions an omen. A bird found dead in a water basin. A child with dreams that speak of shadowed women walking backward in the fog. Another voice chimes in. He saw smoke from Margaret's chimney long after midnight. Another says he passed her hut and his dog wouldn't stop growling. A woman whispers that the herb bundle she bought from Margaret cured nothing. Her husband's fever worsened. You notice how no one accuses directly. Not yet. But the air thickens with suggestion. The silence becomes dangerous. This is the slow, spiraling birth of collective fear. You feel it wrapping around your ribs like ivy, tightening with each shared story, each memory twisted just slightly in the retelling. Fear doesn't need proof. It only needs repetition. One person plants a seed, and another waters it with a story. Soon, it's a forest, casting shadows on every thought. This moment, so ordinary, so subtle, is the mechanism of something vast. It's how terror organizes itself in a village. The fear of misfortune, sharpened by hunger and grief, finds a shape, a target, and usually it is someone who can't or won't defend themselves. Now imagine being inside each of these villages, not cruel, not evil, just afraid. You lost a child, your roof leaks, your pig gave birth to stillborns. You try to find order in chaos, and when order refuses to come, you invent one, a name, a face, a witch, and once that face is chosen, it becomes the axis of everyone's discomfort. The blame coils tightly around her until she can't move without making the guilt of others breathe louder. If she weeps, she confesses. If she remains calm, she hides something. If she runs, she's guilty. If she stays, she's arrogant. Listen now to the hushed tones as stories evolve. Margaret didn't just offer herbs. She muttered when she handed them over. Didn't she once refuse to lend a bowl to her neighbour? Her cat went missing for days. Did it come back? Changed? These fragments, these nothings, piled together like kindling. No one brings fire yet, but you can feel the friction. This is how the scapegoat is born, not with grand speeches or doctrine, but with the gradual poisoning of trust. With each breath of suspicion, the accused grows more monstrous in the mind of the group. The more they stare at her, the more they see what they fear. It's not what she's done, it's what she might be, what she reminds them of, what they refuse to understand. Now, imagine again this village, 10 years later. A child born this winter asks why their uncle never speaks of his wife, why a certain name is never mentioned during harvest festivals. What happened to the herb woman who once helped deliver every baby in the village? No one answers directly, but silence too is a teacher. The psychology of fear doesn't fade easily. It lingers in corners, embedded in customs, nestled inside stories passed from elder to child. And you, sitting here in this circle of distrust, can feel how easily one frightened night can shape generations. And yet, there's more. Because what happens when fear grows roots, not just in thought, but in law? When it's no longer just your neighbor whispering, but your Lord listening? When punishment for disbelief is no safer than belief itself? How far can fear spread once the seed is sown and the church starts to till the soil? How could the belief in witches grow strong enough to reshape the laws, rituals, and lives of entire communities? You step inside the hall and the air changes immediately. It's heavier, colder, though not from the weather outside. You feel it settle on your shoulders like damp wool that refuses to dry. The walls rise high and narrow, made of stone blackened with years of smoke. The arched ceiling curves above you like the belly of some ancient beast, groaning faintly with each draft of wind that slips through the arrow-slit windows. The only light comes from iron sconces holding slow-burning torches. Flames flicker just enough to cast shifting shadows across the wooden bench where the accused now sits alone. Breathe in, slowly. The scent here is thick with sweat, mildew, and something fainter, like scorched leather. You hear the quiet creak of the magistrate's chair as he leans forward, lips pursed in habitual judgment. His robes are stiff with formality. His fingers adorned with rings that shine faintly in the low light. Next to him, a scribe sharpens his quill against a block of pumice. The sound as faint and sharp as a whisper in your ear. Now let your eyes adjust. You see the accused, a woman, her wrists bound in coarse hemp rope, ankles shackled loosely to the legs of her chair. She's barefoot. One toe bleeds slightly from where she must have stumbled. Her face is pale, eyes sunken, her hair tangled with days of fear and restless nights on stone. You shift your gaze to the table in front of the judge. Upon it lies a leather-bound ledger, pages inked in neat, unforgiving script. The charges are written plainly: suspicion of heretical maleficium, sorcery. You know, because now you've lived through the build-up, that this charge needs no material proof, only rumor, whispers, maybe the wrong glance, or too much silence. And this is how it starts. The bailiff reads aloud from a parchment. His voice is low and dull, but every word lands like a stone in a still pond. Did knowingly curse the harvest of her neighbor. Did keep night watch for unknown purpose. Did mutter words in foreign tongue by moonlight. Did cause milk to spoil in cow. He continues. You notice how none of it would stand in a court centuries later. But here, it is more than enough. In fact, it's overwhelming. You imagine yourself sitting nearby, watching the woman's expression remain unreadable. You wonder, what could she say? That she whispered old prayers for healing, that she hummed to herself in her garden, that she burned sage not for spells, but for pests. Every explanation sounds weaker when filtered through suspicion, especially when your judges believe they're saving your soul from eternal damnation. Then come the witnesses, a neighbor, a cousin, a midwife. All speak of strange things, nothing solid, just stories. She looked at my child the wrong way, one says. The bread never rose again after she left, says another. And though these voices tremble with doubt, each adds weight to the growing burden. You feel it in your stomach. A slow, cold twist, not just of fear but of certainty. The kind of certainty that spreads in towns like these when crops fail and children don't wake. The magistrate doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't need to. His authority is built into the stones. He glances at the scribe, nods. The quill scratches again, immortalizing these moments in ink, so they may never be undone. Now the questioning begins. It's quiet, almost polite. Have you ever spoken to spirits? Do you own a black cat? Do you know charms or words from the old tongue? The woman's answers, measured, calm, only make them more suspicious. They look at each other. A woman accused and not weeping. Perhaps that's the most dangerous kind. At the edge of the room stands a wooden frame, simple, square, with iron loops fixed into it. It's called the rack. Another sits beside it, a chair lined with spikes, now empty, yet watching like a hungry beast. The tools of confession, the instruments not of truth, but of pain. You hear chains clink as one of the assistants checks their placement. Oils a pulley. Nothing is used yet. The threat is enough, for now. But if she does not confess, then yes, they will be. The idea, of course, is not just to extract information. It's to confirm a worldview. Pain makes people speak, and once they do, they give the court the language it expects. Confessions become stories, Stories become warnings, and warnings keep the village safe, so they think. Imagine again the woman's thoughts. Maybe she has no family left. Maybe she already knows that her fate is sealed regardless of what she says. Maybe she will confess to anything. Maybe she truly believes they'll spare her if she weeps hard enough. You hear her voice now, trembling but clear. I've never harmed anyone. It doesn't matter. The magistrate leans forward, eyes heavy. But would you say that under the gaze of God, he says, or in the face of suffering? This is the theatre of guilt, the pageant where silence is a lie and speech is a trap. A world where the fear of not knowing breeds the comfort of ritual punishment. And yet, what strikes you most is the ordinariness of it all. The way the process unfolds not in rage or chaos, but in calm procedure. There are records, there are signatures, there are rules, but the outcome, always the same. You feel it now, the slow pull of dread, the way a person is peeled away from humanity inch by inch, until what's left is only a shadow of who they once were. And the question drifts toward you, soft as dust. Why did so many people, desperate, frightened, entirely innocent, confess to crimes they never committed? You descend a narrow flight of worn stone steps, each one slick from centuries of damp and wear. The air grows colder as you go, not simply in temperature, but in sensation, as if the very walls remember things they wish they didn't. The final step opens into a chamber carved out of the earth, where the scent of old iron, mildew, and stale breath hangs heavy, impossible to ignore. A single torch burns low in the corner, its flame barely clinging to the wick, casting uncertain light over the objects that await you. Now stand there a moment. Don't move. Let your eyes adjust. Chains dangle from the ceiling, long, rusted, their rings rubbed smooth by use. A table stands against one wall, its surface stained. Not fresh, but aged to a dark varnish by time and countless misfortunes. At its foot lies a cracked bucket, half filled with water, the surface still. Above it, an iron bar runs across the ceiling, fitted with pulleys and ropes. Beside it, a simple stool. And next to that, a hood. No one screaming. Not now. But the silence is worse. It's too quiet, as if the walls themselves are holding their breath. You're in an inquisitorial chamber, part prison, part sanctum, part theatre. Imagine yourself not as an observer, but as the one they've brought in next. Your wrists are already raw from the rope. Your ankles chafe where leather straps hold you just tightly enough to bruise, but not tightly enough to break. You've had nothing to eat in 2 days. They've let the cold seep into your bones. And now they begin. It starts with questions, repeated, reworded, spoken gently, then loudly, then again. They ask if you've flown at night, if you've met other women in the forest, if you've whispered pacts beneath the moon, if you've seen the devil and what he looked like. They offer details, and you nod without realizing, just to make it stop. Then come the methods. They don't call it torture. Not yet. They call it the question. As if answers are all they want. You feel yourself pulled toward a structure they call the strappado. Your arms bound behind you, hoisted upward by the rope, then dropped just fast enough to wrench the joints, not to snap them. You hear the pop in your shoulders like someone stepping on a frozen branch. They ask again. You say no. You scream. They write that down. Next is the thumbscrew. It's a simple tool, 2 metal plates, turned by a crank. At first, just pressure, then pain, then a white-hot clarity that floods your mind with light and nausea and trembling. You imagine the bones inside you giving way like dry twigs. The scribe doesn't look up from his parchment, Another tool waits in the corner. The rack, its long, flat frame lined with wooden rollers, ropes wrapped at both ends. They lay you flat. The ropes stretch. A little more, a little more. Your back arches. Your breath comes in shallow, broken waves. They ask again. Names, packs, signs, familiars. Say yes, and the ropes pause. Say no, and they turn again. What you're feeling now isn't simply pain. It's something deeper. A terror that dissolves your selfhood, that makes time collapse into a blur of shadows and fire. You're no longer concerned with innocence or guilt. All you want is for the questions to stop, for the room to stop spinning, for your hands to stop shaking, for the air to come back into your lungs. And so, you speak. You admit you cursed the fields. You admit you danced at midnight. You admit you met a man in the forest with burning eyes. You name others, neighbors, midwives, even the baker's wife. Not because you believe it, not because it's true, but because in that moment, truth no longer matters. Now take a step back. Look at what just happened. Not to you, but to countless others like you. Torture wasn't about discovering secrets. It was about confirming suspicions. It turned human bodies into instruments of narrative. Once the accused confessed, the story could be written. Once the story was written, the village could breathe easier, knowing they had banished the evil in their midst. And yet, you feel the contradiction. The same hands that tortured swore they did so to save souls. They weren't monsters in their own eyes. They were instruments of divine justice. But what kind of justice breaks the innocent to validate the fearful? You shift in the chamber, brushing your fingers against the wall. The stone is cool but not smooth. It holds marks, scratches perhaps, or the stains of candles long burned. These are not dramatic places, no flames or grand speeches, just cold rooms where people change forever. Now imagine walking back up those steps, your body aching, your mind dimmed, your spirit bent like iron left too long in the coals. You blink against the sunlight. You hear birdsong again. The village waits above, but you're not the same person who descended. And the question that follows you, whispering in the stillness, is not about truth. What truly drives a person to admit to crimes they never committed? You stand at the edge of the hall, the soles of your boots sinking slightly into rushes strewn across the flagstone floor. Above you, wax-dripping chandeliers creak in the rafters, their many candles reflecting in the polished silver of goblets and the brass trim of scabbards. The room glows golden, warm with firelight and laughter, and yet you sense something colder beneath. This isn't just a feast, it's a theatre. The local lord has called it a celebration, a name day perhaps, or a treaty renewed. But the air hums with something else entirely. You smell roasted meat and imported cinnamon, yes, but you also catch whiffs of beeswax polish on leather and the sharp sting of clove-oiled parchment, freshly inked and still drying. Papers of law, orders of arrest, edicts cloaked as ritual. You walk slowly between groups of guests, listening as they sip and murmur. A bishop speaks in low tones with a magistrate, their hands not far from their belts, one clutching a jeweled cross, the other resting beside a steel-hilted dagger. Their words drift to you between violins, unsanctioned gatherings near the orchard. Same widow, same moon. Might need to proceed formally. Across the room, a merchant whispers of a neighbor who failed to appear at Mass. 3 lambs died that very week, he says, stroking his beard. She keeps dried bones near her doorstep. Another man snorts, clearly skeptical, until he sees the magistrate glancing over. He lowers his voice. You feel the balance here, how carefully it's held between civility and control. This is not the open frenzy of a frightened village. It's something more refined, more strategic. Here, witchcraft isn't just a fear, it's a tool. You sense it in the way laws are quoted, with the same tone used for toasts, the way the church and the court have become two arms of the same body, reaching not just into homes, but into hearts and minds. Fear, after all, is more powerful when it's institutional, more useful when codified. Take a step to your left, and you'll find the table of scribes. Their ink-stained fingers move with precision, copying sections of canon law and civil decrees onto stretched parchment. The handwriting is elegant, practiced. There's no passion here, only record-keeping. The words they write carry weight. The Pope's bull, Summis Desiderantes Affectibus, from 1484, which declared witchcraft a heresy. The secular codes that followed, especially the Constitutio Criminalis Carolina of 1532, offered clear legal grounds for interrogation, even torture. Now imagine how this changes things. No longer is witchcraft just the stuff of whispers and frightened dreams. It's a prosecutable offense, sanctified by the church, sanctioned by the state. A magistrate can point to scripture. A bishop can reference statutes. A nobleman can accuse a rival's wife and call it moral duty. And the people, well, they don't protest. Not because they agree, but because now silence feels safer. Walk with me through the side chamber now, just behind the great hall. The music fades, the perfume lingers, but the light dims. This is where decisions are made, over maps, not meals. A high-ranking cleric points to dots along a river, noting parishes where attendance has dropped. A steward nods grimly. We'll begin inquiries after the harvest. Another paper is marked. This is how fear becomes policy. Think back to Margaret, to the village. You realize now that what began as superstition has been co-opted, refined, and repurposed by those who write the rules. When a witch is burned, it is not only a soul condemned, it is a message, a signal that deviation will not be tolerated, that unity, obedience, and faith must be maintained at any cost. Now return to the main hall once more. Music swells again, and laughter flows more freely with the third cup of wine. But behind each smile, you sense calculation. Who sat where? Who spoke to whom? Who nodded too slowly when the bishop mentioned heresy? The dance continues. As you watch the noble guests swirl across the floor, you feel the gears of power turn behind the velvet curtains, not with rage, but with intention, not through mobs, but through mandates. You realize that witch hunts were not always chaos. They were sometimes choreography. And so a question begins to crystallize, as sharp as winter air slipping through the cracks in a stained glass window. How far would those in power go? Not just to suppress danger, but to manufacture it, in order to tighten their grip on a world already trembling at the edges. You walk along a narrow forest path at dusk, where the last of the light filters through twisted branches, dappling the mossy ground with muted gold. The woods are quiet here, not the kind of silence that soothes, but the kind that listens. Leaves rustle above you, but there's no breeze. The stillness feels personal, like the forest remembers. And it does, because somewhere along this path, 100 steps behind or 100 years ago, someone once fled under the same canopy, barefoot and breathless, accused of something she didn't understand. Tonight, you don't meet witches. You meet people. The first is Anna. She's 23. Her fingers smell faintly of juniper and salt from the brine barrels she tends. She lives alone, near the edge of the village, in a cottage she inherited after her parents died of fever. She doesn't speak much. Some say it's because she's hiding something. Others whisper that it's grief. You see her rise early each morning, her hands red from the cold water she hauls from the stream. You watch her kneel in the chapel with quiet devotion, then return to her goats and her clay jars of dried mint and wormwood. When 2 children in the village fall sick, the midwife says it's bad air, but the sickness spreads. Anna's name surfaces not as a scream, but as a question. Didn't she once refuse to sell milk to that family? The question becomes a suggestion. The suggestion becomes a certainty. One morning, she's gone from her garden. Her front door hangs open. The herbs inside hang drying, undisturbed. The second is Thomas. He's a widower and a carpenter, known for crafting unusually intricate wooden crosses. They say he talks too much to his dog and too little to people. His wife, long dead, was rumoured to be able to cure headaches with nothing more than her breath and a whispered verse. People remember that now, as though memory is proof. When a fire breaks out in the granary, someone swears they saw Thomas nearby earlier that day, carrying what might have been a bundle of rags. Or maybe it was just wood shavings. That night, his house is surrounded. The next morning, his tools are left in the dirt, still, sharp, useless. You picture each of them not in chains but in motion, chopping wood, baking bread, stitching a hem, singing softly while kneading dough. Their lives were ordinary. That's what makes it so heavy. They weren't cursed or dark or touched by some shadow. They were simply different or alone or inconvenient. Now meet Elise. She's 65, toothless but sharp-eyed, and remembered for helping deliver nearly every child in the village for 2 decades. She knows when the first frost will come by how the birds change their song. Her knowledge once made her respected, then feared, then resented. Her cottage contains books, not many, and not forbidden, but enough to cause unease. One of them, a treatise on herbs, was written in Latin. That alone becomes enough. You hear her voice as she stands trial, quieter than expected, more measured than you imagined. She denies nothing because she doesn't understand the accusations. The questions aren't about truth. They're riddles designed to entrap. Did she ever speak to someone who later died? Did she ever make a poultice without priestly blessing? Did she know the names of stars? Of course she did. So did every shepherd who navigated by night. But no one asked them. And then there's Marta. You don't meet her directly. You learn her through the notes her sister leaves behind. A young girl with uneven handwriting and ink-blotted fingers. Marta was 15. She laughed too loudly, danced barefoot at dusk, and was seen once plucking feathers from a dead crow for a charm she said would bring her dreams. She told a friend she wanted to become a healer, like her grandmother. That friend told her mother. That mother told the church warden. And that, as they say, was that. You feel a chill now. Not from the wind, but from something older. The way truth was never enough. The way fear soaked into the soil until it sprouted accusations like weeds. All of these people had neighbors. Some of them had friends. But none of them had enough to speak when the moment came. Silence built the pyres as much as firewood. You hear it now. The clatter of tools abandoned. The door left ajar. The last kettle still warm on the hearth. You smell the faint sweetness of dried lavender that no one will steep again. You see lives folded up not in drama, but in the quiet erosion of being believed. And still, this question follows you, not loud, but persistent, like the sound of footsteps behind you on that same forest path. Why was it so easy for an entire society to abandon its own? People they'd laughed with, traded with, prayed beside. Just because someone else said the word witch, you step over the wooden threshold into a space lit not by torchlight, but by a dozen tiny flames dancing atop beeswax candles. The scent envelops you before your eyes fully adjust. A heady mix of dried lavender, crushed fennel, and the faint tang of ash clinging to the rafters. It's not unpleasant. It's warm, earthy, intimate. The air carries the ghost of wood smoke, and beneath that, something greener, living, perhaps thyme, perhaps rue. You're in the home of a Travnitzer, a woman known in these parts, not as a witch, but as a wise one. She's older, but her back is still straight. Her hair is wrapped in a cloth dyed with walnut husks, her sleeves rolled high, her fingers stained the color of soil and berries. You hear her hum as she moves, low, rhythmic, the kind of tune passed down from a time when stories weren't written, but remembered. Her hands flutter over bundles of herbs hung from beams, brushing against rosemary, mugwort, angelica. Each touch seems deliberate, each plant carefully chosen. You stand quietly near the door, but she's already aware of you. "Take off your boots," she says, not unkindly. "The floor's warm today." You do. The rushes underfoot are dry, laced with sage and crushed fern, releasing their scent with every step. You see a table near the hearth, laid with bowls of powdered bark, clay pots of honey, a bundle of bones tied with red thread, and a dark vial that glints blue when it catches the firelight. This isn't witchcraft. This is knowledge. Practical, precise, rooted in the patterns of the land and the rhythm of seasons. She speaks of nettle for blood, of comfrey for broken bones, of wormwood for nightmares, and clove boiled in wine to soothe a sore tooth. None of it is strange to her, none of it mystical. She learned it from her mother, who learned it from hers. These aren't spells, they're recipes, instructions, ancient and evolving, carved into the memory of women whose lives were tethered to the soil. But then she gestures to a box in the corner. Inside are talismans, objects with no clear function except to comfort or protect. A doll with a braided head and no face, a circle of pine twigs wrapped in linen, a feather dipped in wax. These are not medicines, these are symbols. She offers no apology for them. Sometimes, she says, belief itself is a kind of cure. You realize now how close her world lies to the one feared by churchmen and whispered about by villagers. One foot in tradition, the other in mystery. But she doesn't see it that way. For her, there is no contradiction. When the baby has a fever, you whisper a rhyme and lay a cool leaf on its forehead. When a man coughs blood, you burn juniper in the house and speak no words for 3 days. It's not spellcraft. It's balance, ritual, hope woven with habit. You sit by the fire, watching her grind bark into powder. She speaks softly, not to you, but to the mortar. The words aren't Latin, they're older, local. A dialect layered with sounds that don't translate neatly. You don't ask her what they mean. You understand somehow that the meaning isn't meant for you. It's meant for the bark. Then the moment shifts. She grows quiet and reaches under the hearthstone. She draws out a small bundle wrapped in oiled cloth and places it gently before you. Inside are symbols painted in ochre, stars, spirals, a crescent moon. This, she says, you never show to anyone who asks what it is. You show it only to those who need it. You feel a sudden tension, not fear exactly, but an understanding of weight, of boundaries, of danger. Because while villagers may thank her for easing a fever, they also whisper when her cat climbs the roof, or when their dreams turn strange after drinking her wine. The church preaches caution. It calls her practices pagan at best, demonic at worst. Her knowledge, though rooted in generations, is not written in Latin or approved by bishops. That makes it vulnerable. That makes her vulnerable. You hear stories from her lips, not fairy tales, but recollections of a girl 3 valleys over who used to scry in water, who vanished one spring, of a farmer's wife who knew how to bless the wheat fields, but was found drowned in the river, of a midwife who buried a stillborn under the hearth and was dragged before a tribunal for hiding unnatural things. These women weren't witches. They were keepers of things that didn't fit neatly into doctrine. They spoke the wrong prayers at the wrong time, to the wrong gods, or to none at all. And yet, their power was not in hexes or curses. It was in memory, in continuity, in the simple, terrifying fact that some knowledge exists outside the control of kings and popes. You sit in stillness, the fire crackling gently, the herbs hissing faintly as they dry above you. You imagine what it would be like to live this way, half trusted, half feared, offering remedies by day, defending your soul by night, knowing that each knock at the door might bring a child in need, or a priest with orders. And so, a thought lingers with you as you rise to leave, your hands now faintly scented with thyme and ash. What happens when knowledge and fear collide in the same village? When a woman's wisdom becomes the very thing that marks her for suspicion? The scent of parchment and warm beeswax welcomes you the moment you cross the threshold. You're standing in a library, not one of grand marble pillars and echoing domes, but a smaller, humbler sanctuary. The walls are lined with oak shelves that creak beneath the weight of bound tomes and rolled scrolls. A single window lets in slanting light, golden with dust, catching the lazy dance of motes in the air. You reach out and run your fingertips along the cracked leather spines, Latin, Greek, even early Italian etched in faded ink. You're not here for magic. You're here for something rarer in this time, knowledge. A man at the desk nods in your direction. His robes are plain, but his eyes are sharp. His hands are stained with ink, and beside him lie stacks of half-bound papers. One bears the name Regiomontanus, another, Marsilio Ficino. You hear the quiet scratch of his quill as he translates a section of Galen into the vernacular. A candle burns beside him, but it's mostly for habit now. Daylight is enough. This is the 15th century. The world is changing. And slowly, painfully, the idea that not every misfortune is the result of curses or demonic pacts begins to take root. You settle onto a wooden stool beside a long table scattered with texts. One of them is an early printing, movable type, Gutenberg style. The letters are uneven, smudged in places, but clear enough. You run your hand over the page and feel the difference. This isn't sacred scripture. It's a book on astronomy. Diagrams of stars, moons, ellipses. It claims that comets don't foretell death, but simply follow celestial paths governed by mathematics. That thunder isn't anger from above, but the movement of air, compressed and released. You turn a page, and another idea confronts you. Earth, not as center, but as planet. A sphere, suspended in space, spinning. You pause, because you realize just how radical that is. If the heavens follow order, then where is the room for the devil's mischief? If illness has cause, bad water, bad air, then why blame a woman with herbs in her pocket? But this is where the tension begins, because the same minds opening to anatomy and optics still clutch their rosaries when a child falls ill unexpectedly. The same physicians who dissect cadavers by day still sprinkle holy water on their thresholds at night. Renaissance thought isn't a clean break from fear. It's a slow negotiation, a recalibration, a whisper that says, perhaps not all is witchcraft. You hear that whisper echoing through the aisles. One book you pick up outlines human anatomy with precision Da Vinci himself might have admired. Another warns against astrology. Another defends it. Then you find a strange volume, part legal treatise, part cautionary sermon. It's the Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches, published in 1487 by Heinrich Kramer. You remember the name. Its pages are methodical, its tone authoritative, and its purpose chilling. Because even as science rises, fear finds new ways to justify itself. The men who penned that manual didn't ignore the Renaissance. They absorbed it, twisted its logic, argued that witches were real precisely because the devil grew stronger in response to human arrogance. That the more you sought answers in stars and organs, the more the enemy cloaked himself in flesh. Knowledge didn't erase witchcraft. It redefined it. You hear the footsteps now, boots echoing down the stone corridor outside. A student, perhaps, or a cleric, or a magistrate looking for citations. The line between scholarship and power is thin. Books don't just illuminate, they also condemn. Now you shift your attention to a letter, aged but preserved between vellum pages. It's from a physician in Padua, writing to his friend in Paris. He speaks of natural causes, of lunar cycles affecting mood, of hysterica passio, and women's health being misunderstood. He doubts witchcraft gently. He urges caution in trials. He dares to ask whether confession under pain is justice at all. But his letter is unsigned. His name redacted by the monk who preserved it. Safer that way. You look up. The library feels warmer now, not because of the fire, but because of what surrounds you. The hum of resistance, the ache of progress, the breath of people who dared to write what others feared to say aloud. These aren't witches, they're thinkers, and yet they too risk being burned, not for hexes, but for questions. You rise and close the book slowly, its spine sighing with age. The dust follows you back toward the door, and as you step outside, the sunlight now sharp against your face, one thought remains. Why, with so many voices beginning to speak of reason, did the old fears still whisper louder? And why did they take so long to die? You sit atop a wooden cart rattling along a muddy road, the wheels groaning beneath you as the landscape shifts. Not in time, but in place. Ahead of you lies a mosaic of Europe, sewn together not by borders on a map, but by memory, by firelight, and by rumour. Each region you'll visit holds its own idea of the witch, shaped by soil, language, and power. And each place, you'll soon see, offers not just difference in detail, but in intention. First stop, Germany. You step down into a market square in Würzburg, circa 1628. The stones beneath your boots are slick from a night rain. Bells toll somewhere distant, low and deliberate. The town smells of coal smoke and cabbage, but there's something else. Wood tar maybe. The scent of scaffolds being raised. A crowd murmurs in front of the courthouse. You push through and see a boy, 12, maybe 13, shackled and trembling. His confession names his own mother and 3 schoolmates. He weeps, the magistrate does not. This is the Holy Roman Empire, where trials reach industrial scale. Between 1580 and 1650, tens of thousands, women, children, even clergy, face accusation and fire. Why so many? Here, witchcraft is not just heresy. It's public menace, civic rot. Cities compete for piety. And behind it all, local lords and bishops fuel the engine, eager to demonstrate their moral muscle. Now climb back into the cart. You travel west, toward France. The countryside grows softer, the hills more sweeping. The language on the wind shifts, nasal, fluid. In Paris, the elite quote philosophers. They speak of reason, of logic, of doubt. But in smaller towns like Loudun or Bordeaux, suspicion still simmers. Picture a priest accused of being seduced by demons, a convent full of nuns convulsing in ecstasy. The case goes public, sensational. Here witchcraft is not peasant-born, but tied to sexual panic, to theatre, to spectacle. The line between obsession and heresy blurs in velvet-draped halls. You taste wine on your tongue now, dry, with an edge of iron. It lingers as you head north. Scotland. The wind sharpens. It smells of peat and salt and wool left to dry on stone fences. You arrive in a small coastal village where cottages hunch together like sheep against the weather. Here, the word witch carries centuries of tension, clan loyalty, Protestant zeal, and isolation. The accused are mostly women, often widows, and always marked as other. You stand before a kirk where John Knox once preached, his sermons blazing like the hearths he denounced. Between 1560 and 1707, Scotland sees one of the highest execution rates in Europe per capita. It isn't just about religion, it's survival, community cohesion. One false step, one wrong glance, one herb gathered in silence, and you're marked. Here, fear clings like fog. Then south again, across the border, England. You expect bonfires. You find bureaucracy. In England, the witch trials begin earlier, 1540s, but flare most brightly during civil unrest. You meet Matthew Hopkins, the so-called witch-finder general. He doesn't wear robes or armour, just a coat, a feathered hat, and a smirk. He travels town to town, gathering names, collecting fees, water tests, devil's marks, sleep deprivation. It's all method, all ledger entries. Between 1645 and 1647, more than 100 people are executed under his watch. Mostly women, many innocent, all expendable. His work is not spiritual, it's entrepreneurial. Now shift east, into Poland, Hungary, the Czech lands. You smell ash trees and hear the hum of Orthodox chants mingling with Latin Mass. These are lands caught between empires, and the paranoia here runs deep. The trials are often brutal, echoing both Roman Catholic severity and Orthodox anxieties. Torture is formalized. Records are kept, but rarely questioned. In places like Poland, trials persist into the 18th century, long after they've faded in the West. And finally, you ride south, into Spain. You expect flames, but instead, you find ink. The Spanish Inquisition, feared across Europe for its reputation, conducted far fewer witch executions than its northern neighbours. Why? Because Spain centralised its Inquisition early, and with centralisation came regulation. Most accusations are dismissed as superstition. The inquisitors are harsh, but systematic. They believe true heresy lies not in peasant magic, but in secret Jews, Muslims, and Protestants. Witchcraft here is a distraction, not a danger. You feel the parchment in your hand, an inquisitorial decree, stamped and sealed, rejecting a village's demand for trial. The reason? Insufficient evidence. You return now to your starting place mind-spinning. You've walked across centuries and borders, and what do you find? Witch hunts were never uniform. They reflected not a single superstition, but many. In Germany, mass hysteria. In France, erotic spectacle. In Scotland, righteous panic. In England, opportunistic prosecution. In Spain, bureaucratic dismissal. And each was shaped not just by fear, but by what those in power wanted to do with that fear. So now you ask yourself, why did some cultures take that fear and stoke it into wildfire, while others, just as devout, just as fearful, chose to contain it? You sit now in a dusty attic, beams low and slanted, where time itself seems to have curled up and gone to sleep. Around you lie boxes filled with yellowing pages, faded ink, and the brittle edges of parchment maps. The smell is unmistakable. Old paper, beeswax polish, and something fainter, the scent of lavender sachets long since dried. You reach out to lift a book, its leather cracked, its spine stitched by hand. Its title is in Latin. Another beneath it bears only a sigil, 5 lines etched like claws. This is where the myths live, not in courtrooms, not in forest huts, but here, in the stories. You open one folio and find a sketch. A woman straddling a broomstick, her hair wild, her mouth wide in laughter or howl. It's hard to say. The ink is rough, but the message is clear. Beneath her, a caption in German. Hexenritt zur Walpurgisnacht. The witch's ride on Walpurgis night. You lean closer. She flies not alone, but in a line of silhouettes, barefoot, shawled, skirts lifted by invisible wind. The broom wasn't always magical. It was household, familiar, intimate, and that's what made it terrifying. You learn that the earliest mentions of broom-riding witches appear in 15th century sermons and witch books, where theologians warn of women flying to secret gatherings. But they didn't invent the idea. They absorbed it from folklore. Older still are tales of night riders, figures who drift between waking and dreaming, who ride beasts or wind or simple branches to secret hills under full moons. The broom, blunt as it seems, was symbolic, a tool of the hearth, a staff of the ordinary, and in the wrong hands, or the wrong imagination, it became a portal. Now turn another page. There, a cat, black as shadow, eyes like coins, its back arched in uncanny alertness. In one engraving, it clings to a woman's shoulder as she casts a circle on the ground. In another, it stares directly at the viewer, mouth open mid-hiss. The caption reads, Familiaris Demonum. You realize the cat, like the toad, the raven, the goat, wasn't feared for what it was, but for what it accompanied. In a world of livestock and dogs, an animal that chose to live beside you, not under you, invited suspicion, especially when that animal watched in silence, especially if your neighbor's cow fell ill the same day your cat gave birth to 3 kittens. You imagine the stories told beside firelight, of witches suckling imps, of demons appearing as animals, of black cats crossing thresholds before misfortune. It was never about the creature. It was about the company it kept. Now listen. You hear the low rhythm of an old ballad, sung in the tongue of the mountains. A melody passed from mother to daughter, its words softened with time. 3 times she turned, 3 times she cried. 3 cats appeared, and 1 soon died. The lyrics speak of spells cast under moonlight, of dancing barefoot in circles, of herbs gathered in silence. But they also mention a man with antlers and burning eyes, a figure who offered power at a price. This is the devil, not the thunderous Satan of cathedral frescoes, but the rustic one, horned, cloaked in leaves, with a voice like honeyed rot. You read accounts from inquisitors, women claiming they met him in the woods, that he kissed them beneath the tail, that he branded their flesh with his mark. Some of these stories were invented under torture, others were dreamed, and some were told so often they became tradition, because fear too has ritual. You now find yourself in front of a tapestry, faded crimson, embroidered with gold thread. It shows a Sabbath, a great circle of women, some clothed, some not, all dancing around a fire. Above them, in the sky, shapes swirl, half bird, half human, indistinct. At the center, the devil again, half man, half goat, smiling. But this isn't a devil's triumph. It's a human projection. You understand now. These myths grew because they explained what could not be explained. When a harvest failed, when a child died, when a woman thrived without a husband, when herbs healed what prayers did not. These stories took root because they offered clarity in a chaotic world. The broom, the cat, the Sabbath. These weren't proof of wickedness. They were symbols, composites, icons constructed by fear and fed by art, sermon and story, by woodcuts and whisper, by need. And now, as you sit in the quiet of this attic, surrounded by the layered breath of centuries, one thought creeps in beside you, soft as smoke through a keyhole. What was it about the image of a woman in control, of her body, her herbs, her voice, that made the world twist her into a monster? You crouch near the edge of a grassy clearing, where the spring sunlight filters through crooked tree branches. The ground is warm beneath your knees, and the air smells of loamy earth, crusty bread, and the faint tang of wool drying in the sun. Around you, children dart between rough-hewn wooden posts and shallow ditches dug for play, their laughter bright, but sharp at the edges. Not all of them are laughing, and none of them have forgotten what they've been told. You hear a rhyme, half sung and half chanted, rising in tempo as feet stomp in rhythm. Spin 3 times and clap your hands. Witches live in forest lands. If you see one, don't you cry. Tell the priest and she will die. The tune is ancient, but the words are new, reshaped by fear and whispered warnings. One child, a girl with a thick braid and a smear of dirt on her cheek, sings loudest. She glances at you, then at a smaller boy crouching alone beneath a crooked fence post. The others follow her gaze. You realize now, they are playing, yes, but they are also practicing. In this time, childhood is not protected. It's porous. Children are witnesses, informants, even accusers. Their dreams, their hearsay, their mimicry of adult dread can become deadly. One word out of place, one nightmare recounted too loudly, and someone disappears. Come closer to the well where a few children gather. One holds a small rag doll, its hair made of flax, its dress stitched with symbols she doesn't understand. She points to the cracks in the well's stone rim and says solemnly, "That's where Marta dropped the charm." The others lean in, wide-eyed. You hear murmurs. Her mother gave it to her. She fed it butter. She talked to it after dark. A boy speaks up. "My uncle says witches eat children's tongues if they talk back." They all go quiet. Then, laughter again. But this time nervous, forced, a little too loud. A way to banish what none of them fully grasp. One girl whispers, "Don't say that," and makes the sign of the cross. She doesn't know why, but it feels necessary. You walk through the village and begin to notice more signs. A crude charm above a doorway, 2 twigs tied with red thread, chalk symbols on a barn. A mother clutches her child tighter when the wind picks up. At night, you hear a child scream from a nearby house. Moments later, shushing voices, the creak of a bed, a whispered prayer. And in the morning, the child says they saw someone at their window, a woman with glowing eyes, a voice like smoke. She didn't speak, just watched. The magistrate comes before midday. The child tells their story again, in front of men with fur-lined robes and dry ink pots. They nod, they write, and somewhere, another door is broken down. But here's the hardest part. The child believes it. Not because they hate, not because they're wicked, but because fear, when breathed in nightly, becomes a truth of its own. They've seen the trial fires. They've heard the screams. They've watched their parents glance over shoulders, speak in hushed tones, rush to church whenever the sky turns strange. And so, children absorb what the village exhales. You sit now beside the chapel and see a boy tracing circles in the dust. He's only 5. His fingers are smudged with charcoal. He hums softly, a tune with no words. You ask his name. He looks up, wary. Then he says, "I saw someone fly. She had no wings." He believes it, completely. He might tell a priest. He might tell a friend. And the story will grow legs and teeth and wings of its own. And one day someone will burn because of it. Now imagine living like this. Every game soaked in threat. Every tale sharpened by consequence. Where play becomes performance. Where silence feels safer than curiosity. Where to be too strange, too dreamy, too alone is to risk accusation. Not just for yourself, but for those you love. You watch the children scatter now, running back to their homes as the sun dips behind the hill. Their shadows stretch long behind them, tangled with things they don't yet have words for. And you're left with one lingering question, caught somewhere between the laughter and the silence. How deeply must fear be planted in a village for it to take root, even in the minds of its youngest? And how many childhoods must wither before anyone dares to pull it out? You sit cross-legged on a woven mat by a hearth that flickers gently, its glow breathing warmth into a room filled with shadowed corners and ancient memory. In your hand lies a curious object, an amulet, small but heavy, wrapped in waxed cloth, its cord frayed from years of wear. It smells faintly of rosemary and tallow. You untie it slowly, fingers trembling, not from fear, but from something deeper. Reverence. You're holding someone's hope. It's a charm, yes, but it's also a prayer, a hedge against the unseen. Around you, the room is cluttered with tools that never touch parchment, but held generations of belief. Birch bundles tied with red string, iron nails pressed into door frames, bundles of rue hung from rafters. You touch a carved stone set beside the window. It's shaped like an eye, etched with lines meant to confuse spirits. Next to it, a small pouch. Inside, crushed eggshells, ash, and something else. Wool, dyed with bloodroot. These were not decorations. They were shields. You walk through a village and see these objects everywhere, if you know how to look. A bent horseshoe above a stable. A carved broom turned bristles up beside a door. A coin nailed into a threshold. You pass a cottage where a young girl traces salt in a circle, while her grandmother whispers something into the wind. Not Latin, not church Latin anyway. This is older, the tongue of the field and the forest. In the kitchen of another home, a woman grinds dried fennel with a mortar of blackened oak. She adds a feather, then a clove, then breathes into it. When you ask what it's for, she says, "To keep nightmares from crossing the sill." You ask what happens if the feather falls out. She doesn't answer, just tightens the pouch. These protections weren't merely functional, they were deeply symbolic. Red thread for blood and vitality, salt for purification, iron for strength, breadcrumbs by the door to distract wandering spirits, pins placed in patterns to ward off malice. They made meaning from the mundane because the mundane was all they had. You kneel in the chapel and notice a bundle of herbs behind the altar. Holy water sits beside it, yes, but so does wormwood. When the priest isn't looking, an old woman dips her fingers into both. Insurance. Because for many, faith in saints wasn't enough. The saints were distant, unreachable, but nettle was always growing, smoke always rising. A chant spoken 3 times at dawn could hold back sickness. A knife left under the bed could sever the dream walker's path. Even the cross was sometimes carved with strange additions, circles within circles, eyes within stars. Now walk into the woods. A boy ties a scrap of his shirt to a hazel branch, whispering something he won't repeat. It keeps her from coming at night, he says. The one with the white hands. You don't ask who that is. You simply nod. Because here, ritual isn't questioned. It's performed. You sit by the riverbank as dusk settles. A woman casts stones into the current, counting softly. For each stone, a worry. For each splash, a ward. She presses her hand to your forehead. To cool your blood, she says, to send her eyes away. And now you begin to understand. Protection wasn't just about keeping witches out. It was about keeping fear manageable. It gave shape to the invisible. It created rules for chaos. It allowed people to act when they otherwise felt helpless. These weren't foolish superstitions. They were emotional technologies, psychological architecture, ways of surviving not just witches, but winter, hunger, plague, betrayal. Even the spoken word held power. You remember the rhyme carved into a doorway, by sun and stone, by salt and bone. No harm shall pass this place alone. And another, whispered by a child, turn your shadow to the hill, and she who watches soon stands still. Do they work? Were they ever meant to? Maybe not in the way you think, but in a world where the line between real and imagined danger is a thread as thin as flax, belief was the spell. And the act of believing, of tying the cord, of drawing the circle, was often enough. So now, holding the charm again, its weight pressing into your palm like a forgotten heartbeat, you ask yourself, could the greatest power of protection lie not in what was made, but in the simple fact that someone believed it could keep the darkness away? You walk beneath high windows that let sunlight flood into a long stone hall. Dust motes swirling like tiny oracles, dancing between columns that now carry not saints, but statues of thinkers. Your boots echo softly on the flagstone. The air is cooler here, less scented by smoke and sweat, more by parchment, candle wax and ink. This isn't a dungeon or a church or a village square. It's a place of ideas. You've stepped into the Enlightenment. Books sit on tables, open to diagrams, celestial charts, anatomical sketches, treatises on natural law. A group of students argue in low voices near a wall lined with shelves. You hear names murmured: Voltaire, Locke, Spinoza. These men don't fear the night. They challenge it. They lift reason like a lantern. But you notice something else. On the wall hangs a single etching. A trial scene. A woman bound, eyes closed, surrounded by hooded figures. A reminder. Even here, even now, fear has not vanished. It's only grown quieter. You walk farther in. A lecturer in a powdered wig adjusts his spectacles and speaks not of demons, but of doubt. If we punish without proof, we are no better than the flames we light, he says. The students nod, mostly. One writes in furious shorthand. Another stares out the window, perhaps imagining his grandmother's village, perhaps remembering what he heard as a child, that witches curse cows, turn milk sour, steal sleep. You leave the university and find yourself in a city square. Paris, Leipzig, Edinburgh. The banners are different, the faces varied, but the shift is the same. Men and women now gather not for executions, but for discourse. Newspapers circulate. Printing presses thrum like mechanical hearts in the basements of booksellers. You smell ink on your fingertips, metallic and sharp. One pamphlet catches your eye, on the misuse of superstition in law. It cites cases of wrongful accusation, of coerced confession. It calls for reform, not in whispers, but in bold serif type. You read it, standing on the curb, then fold it, tuck it into your coat, and yet you turn a corner. A crowd has gathered around a child in the market. She swears she saw her neighbour speak to a shadow. Murmurs ripple. A man crosses himself. A woman grips her son's hand tighter. The magistrate is called, not to punish, but to ask questions. You feel the tension crackle in the air, thin as parchment, but sharp as glass. Because fear doesn't die with debate. It adapts. The Enlightenment brings laws, yes, new legal codes, skepticism, a higher standard of evidence. Torture begins to wane. Trials become rarer, slower, more difficult to justify. In countries like Prussia and Austria, witch trials are formally outlawed by the late 18th century. Voices like Friedrich Spee, who once risked his life to defend the accused, are now quoted in law schools. But in other places, rural villages, forgotten valleys, old beliefs still smoulder. You ride through a countryside dotted with farmhouses. Doors still bear iron nails. Fields still avoid planting on certain days. A child still recites a charm before bed. Just in case. And in one dusty chapel, you see a priest who preaches both gospel and warning. The devil is clever, he says. He takes new shapes. He follows men into cities, wears robes, quotes books. It's not medieval anymore, but it's not modern either. You reach a printing shop in Amsterdam. A man is typesetting an essay titled Rational Ethics and the Illusion of Sorcery. He laughs when you mention witchcraft. No one believes in that anymore, he says. But you notice he still wears a charm around his neck, small, copper, warm from the skin. He notices you looking, shrugs, old habits. You return to the city and sit by a fountain. The water sparkles. The sky is clear. You've read the laws, the arguments, the declarations. And yet, beneath it all, something stirs. Because reason shines in salons and universities, but fear still walks barefoot in alleys and behind shutters. It lingers in lullabies and old women's eyes. It curls beneath logic like roots under cobblestones. And now, as you listen to the rustle of pamphlets and the clatter of hooves on stone, one question nestles into your thoughts, steady as a heartbeat. If the world now had the tools to think beyond witches, why did so many still choose not to? You find yourself standing in a narrow gallery lined with faded tapestries and framed wood-cut prints, their surfaces cracked by time, their colours dulled to a dusky warmth. The air smells faintly of linseed oil and old varnish, mixed with candle smoke and damp stone. The sound of your footsteps echoes faintly as you pass image after image, faces, flames, forests, and in nearly all of them, one figure returns, a woman, alone. She may be old, hunched over a cauldron, or young, draped in flowing robes, a serpent coiled around her wrist. In one etching, she is naked, surrounded by bats. In another, she rides a goat into the night sky, trailing ribbons and fire. These are not courtroom sketches. These are visions, artifacts of imagination, and they tell you something facts often miss. The witch wasn't just feared, she was fascinating. In 15th century woodcuts, she's rendered crudely, elongated limbs, wild eyes, surrounded by symbols that would make a scholar twitch. In 16th century paintings, the tone shifts. You see Peter Bruegel's dark humour, Albrecht Dürer's precision. Here, the witch is grotesque, monstrous, yet strangely seductive. Artists exaggerate her features, but also her power. A woman seated with snakes at her feet is no mere scapegoat. She commands attention. Move forward. Now you're in a small theatre, cramped with wooden benches and smelling of sweat and oranges. A candle-lit stage glows ahead. A play unfolds. A king falls to madness, guided by witches whose voices crawl like ivy through his mind. Double, double toil and trouble. The words roll from the actors' mouths like smoke. You're watching Shakespeare's Macbeth, a fiction, yes, but shaped by the same fears that fueled real fires. This isn't just entertainment, it's education. Every whisper of prophecy, every eerie laugh reinforces an image. The witch as tempter, as corrupter, as destiny's usher. You see the crowd lean in, not just from interest, but belief. These lines echo the sermons they've heard, the stories their mothers told while stirring porridge. Now walk through a street in 17th century Amsterdam. Bookstores brim with illustrated chapbooks, cheap, crude and powerful. Titles like The Devil's Midwife and The Widow Who Rode Wind sell fast. You flip through pages and find rhyming verse, warnings disguised as tales, the illustrations. Always vivid, always woman-centered, hair tangled, lips parted, often barefoot. You notice something. The witch has become both cautionary tale and curiosity. Art offers contradiction. In German folktales, witches live in gingerbread houses. In English ballads, they curse nights and vanish in smoke. In Italy, La Strega is as likely to heal as to hex. Painters render her in twilight hues, dancing on hilltops under full moons. Writers give her riddles, potions, lovers. Sometimes she's monstrous, sometimes maternal. You touch the edge of a tapestry embroidered with red and gold thread. It shows a woman kneeling before a tree, a raven perched above her, a hand extended in offering. Around the border are symbols: sun, snake, chalice. You ask what it means. The weaver shrugs. Depends who looks at it, because by the 18th century, the witch has split in two. In one thread, she remains a warning, ugly, evil, to be feared and avoided. But in another, she becomes muse. Artists begin to reframe her not as monster, but mirror. A reflection of male anxiety, of social change, of hidden power. Romantic poets paint her with melancholy. Gothic novelists give her tragedy. And later, feminists claim her as rebel. You sit now in a quiet library. A book before you lies open to a 19th century engraving. A woman chained to a stake, her face calm, her gaze upward. Around her, the crowd blurs into shadow. The caption reads, "She would not kneel." You close the book, and you wonder, when did the witch stop being a figure of fear and start becoming a figure of resistance? Because the artists saw it before the courts did. They knew something unspoken, that power denied will always find shape. And sometimes that shape flies on a broom. Sometimes it sings in rhyme. And sometimes it burns, but never disappears. So now the question lingers with the scent of ink and dust. Did art reflect the fears of its time, or quietly teach people to see the witch as something else entirely? You step into a dimly lit cottage where the scent of cold stone and fading embers clings to the air like a reluctant memory. The hearth's flame has long died down, leaving only shadows that stretch across bare wooden walls. The silence here is heavy, thick with absence, with the kind of stillness that presses on your chest. In this house, a family grieves. A mother sits clutching a worn shawl, her eyes distant, lips pressed thin. Across from her, a young boy traces patterns on the rough-hewn table, his fingers trembling with uncertainty. The father's boots stand by the door, dusty but untouched. Someone is missing, someone taken. This is the aftermath of witch hunts. Outside, the village carries on, but cracks have begun to show. Where once there was laughter, now whispers echo in the streets. Shops shutter early, neighbors avert their gaze. The void left by one lost soul ripples through the lives of many. You imagine the economic strain. The accused often bore the role of healer, midwife, or herbalist. the providers of knowledge and care. Their absence meant more sickness, more childbirths without aid, more sorrow. Fields went untended. Animals left unattended. The family's livelihood withered alongside their hearts. In the marketplace, a merchant counts coins with a furrowed brow. Credit tightens. Trade slows. The fear that drove the hunt seeps into commerce, breeding suspicion and mistrust. Every glance could hide accusation. Every deal could harbor betrayal. You wander through a churchyard where fresh graves are marked with simple crosses. Names scratched roughly into wood, forgotten too soon. Each one a story halted mid-breath, a future stolen by fear and ignorance. But it's not only material loss that haunts these places. In homes, children grow wary. They learn early that words are weapons. Silence is safety. Stories told by candlelight twist into cautionary tales. Families fracture under the weight of suspicion, torn between love and self-preservation. You sit beside a window and watch a mother rock her child, whispering prayers for protection. Her voice is soft, but trembling, because the world outside offers no guarantees. The scars run deeper than skin. You hear of neighbors who refuse to speak, fearing they'll be next, of relatives severed by suspicion, of alliances broken by whispered accusations. The hunt breeds isolation as much as it does fire. Yet amidst the sorrow, you notice resilience. Women gather in quiet corners, sharing herbs and hope. Children clutch talismans and stories of protection. Communities find ways to survive, to mend, to remember. And through it all, one question lingers like the fading light at dusk. Could this tide of fear have been turned? Could lives, families, and histories have been saved from these devastating wounds? Or was this tragedy written into the fabric of their time? You step quietly into a modern museum, where polished marble floors gleam under soft, carefully placed lighting. The air is cool, regulated by invisible currents from overhead air conditioners, carrying the faint scent of fresh paint and polished wood. Your footsteps echo softly as you move through the halls, surrounded by glass cases filled with artifacts, ancient manuscripts, charred pieces of wood, rusted chains once used in grim trials. Here, history is preserved not to terrify, but to understand. You pause before a display detailing the witch hunts, the dates, the places, the names. The numbers loom large. Tens of thousands accused, thousands executed. The cold facts sit side by side with personal stories. Written letters from those who lived in fear, testimonies smudged by tears and time. Scholars have spent centuries piecing together this tapestry, unraveling myths from reality, uncovering the social, religious, and political threads that wove this tragic era. Their work is painstaking and precise, revealing not just the horrors, but also the humanity buried beneath suspicion. As you move to the next exhibit, you see portraits and statues representing witches in varied lights. Some show them as tormentors cloaked in darkness. Others depict them as wise women, guardians of knowledge, healers of bodies and minds. The narrative has evolved. Once a symbol of fear, the witch has become a symbol of resilience, a reclaimed figure of feminine strength and independence. You hear a soft voice from a nearby audio guide, speaking calmly about the intersection of folklore, gender, and power. How modern feminism has embraced the figure of the witch as a symbol of empowerment and resistance against oppression. You feel a subtle shift in atmosphere, from judgment to empathy, from accusation to understanding. Walking further, you find a wall of contemporary art, vivid paintings, sculptures, and installations. Some celebrate the mystique and magic. Others confront the dark past with stark realism. You touch the smooth surface of a sculpture that melds traditional symbols, a broom, a cat, a crescent moon, with modern iconography. The space is alive with dialogue between past and present, fear and acceptance, ignorance and knowledge. In this moment, the story of witches is no longer confined to dusty books or shadowed forests. It breathes, evolves, and challenges. You take a deep breath, smelling the faint hint of lavender from a nearby display. You realize that this history, though distant, still resonates today, in culture, in art, in the questions we ask about justice, fear, and power. And as you stand amidst this blend of past and present, a quiet question lingers in the air. What lessons can we truly learn from the story of witches and those who hunted them? Lessons that might guide us away from fear and toward understanding. You find yourself standing in a softly lit room, where the flickering glow of candles cast dancing shadows on walls adorned with symbols both ancient and new. The scent of burning sage and incense drifts through the air, weaving a tapestry of aromas, earthy, smoky, and faintly sweet. A low, rhythmic chant hums in the background, blending with the occasional crackle of a fire, creating a soundscape that feels both timeless and immediate. This is a modern ritual, yet its roots stretch deep into history. You notice the blend of old and new, crystals resting alongside freshly picked herbs, a well-worn grimoire sitting beside a smartphone open to an online forum about magic. The practitioners move with reverence, their gestures echoing traditions passed down through generations, but also adapted to contemporary life. Here, the myths of witches from centuries ago have found new life, not as figures of fear, but as sources of empowerment and spiritual connection. You learn how ancient stories about sorcery, nature, and the supernatural transformed over time into the vibrant cultures of neo-paganism and Wicca. These modern faiths reclaim symbols once used to demonize, turning them into emblems of healing, balance, and personal growth. The triple goddess, the moon phases, sacred circles, all carry layered meanings that resonate with practitioners today. The community is diverse, young and old, urban and rural, skeptics and believers. The lines between folklore, spirituality, and identity blur, creating a rich mosaic of experience and expression. You hear laughter, whispered prayers, and stories shared around the ceremonial space, echoes of humanity's enduring quest for meaning. You touch a smooth quartz crystal, cool in your palm, and feel the hum of history beneath your fingertips. The same history that once labeled women as witches, now inspiring a renaissance of magical thought. Yet, even amidst this renewal, questions remain. What is magic really? Is it power, belief, ritual, or something deeper? How do ancient fears and myths shape the way we understand these practices today? As you watch the candles flicker, their light both revealing and concealing, you realize that magic's meaning is as varied as the flames themselves, changing, adapting, and illuminating different truths for every seeker. And so, the question that lingers softly in the warm, fragrant air is this: what does magic truly mean for us now, in a world that both remembers and reinvents its past? You find yourself gently unfolding the brittle pages of a diary, penned centuries ago by a woman living in the shadow of the 17th century's witch hunts. The delicate script is faded, the ink smudged in places, yet her words carry the weight of a life lived under constant fear and suspicion. The air around you seems to still, as if honoring the voices that time tried to silence. Her entries reveal the daily rhythms of survival, a careful balance between maintaining hope and navigating the dangers of a world ready to condemn her. You hear the faint creak of wooden floorboards beneath her humble cottage, the soft rustle of fabric as she moves cautiously through her home, wary of eyes that might be watching. She writes of neighbors who once greeted her warmly, now turning their backs, whispers trailing behind like shadows at dusk. The diary is filled with accounts of clandestine prayers, secret gatherings, and the small acts of courage that sustained her spirit. You smell the faint scent of dried herbs pressed between the pages, remnants of remedies and rituals passed down through generations. These are not tales of grand heroics or dramatic confrontations. They are intimate snapshots of a life lived on the edge, marked by resilience, sorrow, and the enduring will to exist despite overwhelming odds. Through her words, you glimpse the humanity often lost in historical records, the tenderness for her children, the silent tears shed in the night, the faint laughter shared in stolen moments of peace. She is a mirror reflecting countless others whose stories have been forgotten or overshadowed by fear. As you close the diary, a profound question echoes softly in your mind. How do we ensure that the memories of those silenced by history are not lost, but instead honored and remembered? You find yourself in a cozy, dimly lit cottage, where the warm glow of a flickering hearth casts dancing shadows on wooden beams. The faint scent of burning wood mingles with dried herbs hanging from the rafters. Here, an elderly woman leans close to her granddaughter, her voice soft but filled with urgency as she shares ancient recipes and stories. Imagine the delicate rhythm of her words, weaving together centuries of knowledge passed down through countless generations. This moment is not merely a passing of time, but a deliberate act of preservation. Despite the shadows of fear cast by relentless witch hunts, women quietly safeguarded the cultural, medicinal, and spiritual wisdom of their communities. Herbal remedies, folklore, rituals, all transmitted in hushed tones, away from prying eyes and accusing whispers. You can almost feel the weight of this legacy, the secret strength embedded in these teachings, the resilience that defied attempts to erase them. The warmth of the hearth reflects not just physical comfort, but the enduring spirit of those who nurtured life amid suspicion and danger. Through these shared stories and remedies, women became the living libraries of their time, preserving what might have otherwise been lost to fear and persecution. Their contributions quietly shaped the foundations of modern herbal medicine and folk traditions still alive today. As the soft lamplight flickers, you're left with a profound thought, preparing you for the final reflections to come. How does this legacy continue to influence us? And what lessons can we carry forward from those who persevered in the darkest of times? You stand on the gentle bank of a slowly flowing river, where time itself seems to ripple in the currents beneath your feet. The air is cool and calm, carrying a faint scent of wet earth and wildflowers, mingled with the soft rustle of leaves overhead. As you breathe deeply, the river's steady murmur lulls your thoughts into a quiet rhythm, inviting reflection on the long journey through history you've just taken. Now, let's draw together the strands of fear, belief, and survival that wove the myth of witches into the very fabric of society. A myth that has endured far beyond the dark centuries when accusations flew and lives were shattered. You feel the weight of those ancient fears, still echoing in stories, art, and culture, shaping how we think about power, otherness, and the unknown. We'll explore why these images and ideas have such staying power, how they mirror our own anxieties, and what lessons lie buried beneath the shadows of superstition. Imagine the countless lives tangled in this history, some victims, some survivors, and how their stories ripple through time like waves on this very river. In this calm moment, you realize that understanding these fears is not just about the past, but a guide to the present. Recognizing how myths take root can help prevent their harm from repeating in new forms. The river flows on, relentless and steady, just like the passage of time and the endurance of human stories. As the evening breeze brushes your skin softly, whispering through the trees, you're left with a final, gentle question to carry into your dreams. What would you have done if you had lived in those times of shadow and suspicion?